Now, despite that presidential veto, Nancy and the Democrats are not giving up their fight to block this emergency declaration.
Bristol County, Massachusetts Sheriff Thomas Hodgson was on hand Friday as President Trump signed his first veto overruling Congress for border funding. He joins us now. Sheriff, welcome.
Good morning, Rachel. Good morning, Pete.
Good morning.
What was it like to be there inside of the Oval Office for that moment, his first veto?
Well, of course, it was an honor to be there, but more importantly, I've been working on immigration reform for 21 years, dealing with Congress since I've been the sheriff, and it was a great moment for me because finally we have somebody after 21 years who sat down, listened to us, and then actually took action. And the president is committed to protecting the people of this country, unlike the members of Congress who we've been asking for 21 years to give us the border security we need. Our communities were deteriorating. Now we're at a point where we have a crisis with regards to drugs and, of course, gangs and so forth that are coming into our communities, intimidating people.
Sheriff, what does this president understand, or what is he willing to do that those before him, even though they promised to address the border security crisis, never did?
First and foremost, to understand the problem. He's a problem solver, and thank God for that, because he has strong leadership and commitment to deal with the problem, not the politics. And the problem we have is the others in Congress over these 21 years have completely turned a deaf ear and a blind eye to law enforcement and the experts, the sheriffs on the border and America's sheriffs now across the country, as well as ICE and our other federal partners on Border Patrol. And he's doing what needs to be done for the people, and he doesn't care about the politics.
Right, but I spoke to some members of Congress who say they support what the president wants to do on the border, but said they voted the way they voted because they did it on principle, constitutional issues, and concerned about what the Democrats might do if this precedent is set. What would you say to those members of Congress who say, I'm just being principled here?
Look, I can't think of anything more principled than following through on your oath to protect the people. This is a crisis now. We've seen it. We've talked about it. We have our boots on the ground. We know what's going on in our communities, and they need to just do it. We've heard these different excuses for 21 years, whether it's principle or some other excuse. We got to look at the fact that people are dying in our communities. Kids are not waking up in the morning when their parents are going to their bedrooms. I have a mother who said that she encourages her son to come to her house and shoot up in front of her because she doesn't want him to die. She's all he has. She has. And,
Wow.
and this is going on all over the country. That's one story. We have a double overdose that happened in our county where the mother and father were on the floor overdosing, foaming at the mouth, and the 3-year-old was rubbing the mother, trying to wake her up, and the 5-year-old toddler was trying to wake his father up.
Wow.
And this is what's going on across this country.
Yeah.
Yep, sounds like an emergency to me.
Look at it and deal with it.
Yeah, it's
There's
horrible.
no question about it.
Yeah.
Thank God the president is taking action.
Amen. Well, thank you for your time. Thank you for your service to our country. We appreciate it, sir.
Thank you, Sheriff.
Thank you both for having me.
You got it.
The Washington Post called it a bipartisan rebuke. Politico said it was an embarrassing rebuff. A dozen Republican senators broke with Donald Trump as the chamber voted 59-41 to block his emergency declaration to fund his border wall, and then the president struck back.
It's fair to say Trump has never had less legislative power than after his national emergency declaration was swatted down by a Republican-controlled Senate. It is a stunning congressional rebuke.
Yeah, there's a very strong rebuke of the president, and 12 senators breaking with the president is certainly a beginning of something.
When we look at these 12 senators, they are rhinos. They're contemptible.
I will be signing and issuing a formal veto of this reckless resolution. People hate the word invasion, but that's what it is. It's an invasion of drugs and criminals and people.
Molly, is there any other way for the press to spin this other than it was a setback for President Trump with that number of Republican defections in the Senate?
I just think there's a much deeper way you can go for some of this. I memean, partly this is just our Constitution allows Congress to do this type of action and for the president to veto. It just seemed like it was so shallow when they were looking at it. You have Republicans who are evenly divided on this. You look at some of the most constitutionally focused senators; they were evenly divided. Rand Paul and Mike Lee voting to slap back on the president, and Ben Sasse and Ted Cruz going the other way. I think it's because of how complicated the situation was. You know, you look at during the Obama administration, Congress actually had to sue the president because he was using funds that hadn't been authorized, that he was not authorized to use. In this case, it might be executive overreach, but this was for an authorized project. The border wall has already been authorized, and he was using appropriated appropriated funds and he was following the law. So it's a little bit of a trickier situation. But
so you don't think it's a setback?
Well, I mean, he's going to, if they actually override the veto, it will be a huge setback.
Right, which actually brings me to my question for Beverly, which is, of course, Donald Trump was going to veto it, and of course, it is quite apparent that neither the House nor the Senate is even close to having enough votes to override that veto. So does that make it a largely symbolic vote? Because it certainly was really hard fought on both sides, and Lou Dobbs is saying these senators are contemptible, but I think for some of them it was a vote of conscience.
Well, I think it's funny that even the word rhino is used in reference to these senators, because
Republicans in name only for those of you just tuning in.
Because actually this was a lot of the conservatives who were standing up against this, and the misperception that is being put out there is this is actually not a rebuke against a border wall or some type of border barrier. This is how he did it. These are many of the same Republicans who didn't like the executive power of Barack Obama. So this is a principled decision.
Because Congress wouldn't provide the $5 billion.
Correct.
And it's not that they're against tougher border security or even a wall. They don't like the method the president used, and they were trying to be consistent.
About precedent as well, which
right.
goes back to that.
But what many pundits are also saying is that this shows Donald Trump's diminished clout after the midterms, that 6 months ago, according to some in the press, that many Republican senators would not have dared cross him about this.
Well, that very well may be the case, but interestingly enough, actually coming out of both CNN and NBC, there was coverage saying that this might actually be good politics for President Donald Trump in the sense that, he's somebody that ran as an outsider, and now he has a foil saying, I'm standing up for my principles and I'm standing up against
my own party.
My own party.
And I do think you see every time there's a division between Republicans in the Senate and the president, people say, oh, that's bad for the president that they're having this division. You are absolutely right that sometimes that division doesn't hurt President Trump. But I also think people aren't looking exactly at what it is for Republican leadership in the Senate to not be a strong supporter of a president that has the vast majority of Republican voters behind them. They know that these things only come up for a vote if Mitch McConnell wants them to come up for a vote. Yeah. They know what's going on here, and they see this. It might not play as well for the Republicans in the Senate as people think.
Yeah, McConnell privately tried to get President Trump not to do the emergency. And, on one level it is symbolic in that the whole thing is tied up in the courts anyway. But I do think it deserved a lot of coverage because it did prompt the first presidential veto, and it is some Republicans, at least, on this one issue breaking with the president. Capri Cafaro, Beverly Hallberg, Molly Hemingway. Thanks so much for joining us this Sunday.
The political games begin after a devastating massacre hits 2 mosques in New Zealand. A gunman opening fire on worshippers in the city of Christchurch, killing at least 49 people and injuring dozens more. But the left already blaming the president.
There's an intolerance that's being spread in this country, in this world, and it comes from the political dialogue. Let's be clear, it comes from political leaders.
Words do have consequences, and we know that at the very pinnacle of power in our own country, people are talking about good people on both sides.
It's all about invaders. It's all about invaders, which is similar language to the killer at the synagogue in Pittsburgh. It's also language that President Trump used in a campaign ad before the midterm election. The word invader means something to white supremacists around the world.
Here with reaction, counselor to the president, Kellyanne Conway. Kellyanne, this really bothers me because the media is lying about this guy. He is a kook, he's an absolute lunatic, and I read his manifesto, and what the media is saying about the manifesto is total BS. This guy says, and this is a quote, "The nation with the closest political and social values to my own is the People's Republic of China." He says he's not a conservative, not a Nazi. He's inspired by all these other whack jobs, not Donald Trump. He calls himself an eco-nationalist, obsessed with fertility rates. He's a racist who thinks immigrants are overpopulating the earth and causing global warming. This is who this guy is. He's not a Donald Trump acolyte, yet the media is putting all the blame on the right and the president's supporters.
Well, you're right. They immediately politicize everything. They do something else. They insert themselves. I must speak. I must say something. No, you don't. You can actually shut up and pray for people and wait for the authorities to make their judgments. And in fact, you can also get the facts from the United States authorities, New Zealand. Look at what the president said right away, condemning violence, condemning hate, standing with the people of New Zealand. People believe that we should all be safe everywhere, but in our places of worship, certainly. And don't do things that will inspire a copycat. So actually, this manifesto provided information that we haven't had in many other
mass shootings, which is clear evidence of who this person is and what motivates him, but don't let that get in the way of having a conclusion in search of evidence. And there's something else going on. You played a couple clips. I've been noticing in the last 2, 3, 4 weeks, as it's increasingly obvious they have no idea how to defeat Donald Trump in 2020. They keep talking about the 2016 campaign. It's getting a little weird. They're playing all these clips constantly, and I think it's because they don't want to cover the economy. They don't want to cover the strides he's making around the globe. They don't want to cover how he's rebalancing trade. They don't want to cover the fact that he says we have a humanitarian and national security crisis at our own border, and this past Friday provided the first veto of his presidency because he believes that. But the media don't let any of that get in their way. They never let the facts get in the way of their opinions. And by the way, they're speaking to each other. They're not informing the public.
Right.
They're giving opinions. That's not news. Give us news, and if you're waiting on the news, we can be patient and wait on the news.
No, you're right. They're not informing the public. They're actually lying to the public because I just proved it. You mentioned the immigration situation. You know, they had the vote in the Senate, 59-41. And I just want to read the Republican senators who broke with the president on the national emergency declaration on the border, just so they're aware. It's Rand Paul, Mike Lee, Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, Lamar Alexander, Mitt Romney, Jerry Moran, Pat Toomey, Rob Portman, Roger Wicker, Marco Rubio, and Roy Blunt. I understand they have their own reasons for doing this. Congress passed the National Emergency Declaration Act. Are they saying that Congress passed an unconstitutional act? I mean, what's the act there if it's not to be used? I understand their point, but at the same time, there is an emergency, and you got to do something because the Democrats do not want to protect the country.
Well, this is not a constitutional crisis. It's a national security crisis at our border. That's what I would call 76,000 migrant aliens being apprehended in February of this year alone. That's what I would call 9 and 10-year-old girls being pumped with birth control by their families before they come here, and then being administered pregnancy tests when they get into at the border, because we know how perilous the journey can come. We know how many women are being sexually assaulted on the journey. I would call it a crisis that we have tons and tons of drugs pouring over our border into our communities. I would call it a crisis that people are being smuggled, that MS-13 gangs and other criminal cartels are coming over the border. That's not everyone, but it shouldn't be one. If it's one, it's 10 too many. And so this president has been consistent for 4 years now, Jesse. We have a crisis at the border. He tried to let Congress do its job. The Congress and the courts have fallen down on the job. They failed to do it. And he is invoking a congressional act from 1976.
Yeah, not that long ago.
43 years old.
Right.
If you don't like that act, then go ahead, Congress, and undo that act. But they don't have the guts to do that.
No.
So we don't have a constitutional crisis here. We have a humanitarian security crisis. Also, there was a surprise that some of the senators who voted with the president against the disapproval resolution, which he vetoed anyway, that they're running in 2020. You know why? Because they hear in North Carolina and in Nebraska and a couple other places, they hear their voters, their people say, excuse me, you better get back to Washington, do your job, and secure that border.
All right, Kellyanne, there she is at the White House. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jesse.